Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Hanrahan, and I'm the head of the Rural Economy Development Programme, and I'm going to be chairing this Zoom seminar on the latest Teagasc Sustainability Report. So just to keep on our schedule, we hope to be wrapped up by 3:30. I'd like to welcome the Director of Teagasc, Professor Frank O'Mara, to say a few words at the start. Over to you, Frank.
Thank you, Kevin, and good afternoon, and a very big welcome to everybody. Today we're launching a very important report, the National Farm Survey Sustainability Report. And there's a lot of talk and debate about sustainability of Irish agriculture at the moment. And it's really important that we have reliable and representative data to inform that debate. And the strength of this report is that it provides that type of reliable and representative data. First of all, it uses the representative data set of farms in the National Farm Survey. And secondly, there's a huge amount of data recorded in this survey, which is carried out by trained recorders using a very thorough methodology. So we depend on the tremendous cooperation of the farmers involved, who are of course anonymized, but I would like to thank them, the recorders, and all the National Farm Survey for their work that has got us to this report here today. This report, it looks at sustainability in its broadest sense, economic, environmental, and social. And while there's often a lot of focus on environmental sustainability when sustainability is discussed, in Teagasc we consider the other two dimensions to be equally important pillars. And indeed, in this version of the sustainability report, there are additional social sustainability metrics reported this year. Another big strength of this report is that it's now in its 7th year, going back to 2013. And really, it's the time series that shows if and when progress can be made that's now becoming one of the emerging strengths of this report. The National Farm Survey is part of the EU's Farm Accountancy Data Network, and the Farm to Fork strategy sets out an objective to change this to a farm sustainability data network. Here in the National Farm Survey, we've been on that journey for many years, and as I've said, this is the 7th year of this report. So we're well ahead of the game in terms of using the very important national resource that the National Farm Survey is in this regard. There's two important points with regard to the methodology in this year's report that will be mentioned by my colleagues, but just to bring them to your attention at the start. Firstly, the greenhouse gas emissions methodology has been updated to use the global warming potentials, or GWPs, from the IPCC 5th assessment report. GWPs, these are the conversion factors to convert methane and nitrous oxide to carbon dioxide equivalents so that we can put all those greenhouse gases into a single basket. So the methane GWP has been increased from 25 to 28 in the IPCC report, and the nitrous oxide GWP reduced from 298 to 265. The national inventory, which is compiled by the EPA, has been updated this year to reflect these new values. So it's important that the National Farm Survey Sustainability Report is also updated. The effect is that agricultural emissions are higher because of the dominance of methane in our emissions. And as I said, the methane GWP has increased quite significantly. Importantly, the historical figures for earlier years have also been updated in this report. This can be a nuisance when comparing to earlier reports, but it is important that we keep the reports up to date with the latest scientific understanding. The second methodological point of note is that the CSO census data on the composition of the farm population is now available, and that there have been some changes to the farm population weights. And these have led to changed estimates of the average farm greenhouse gas and ammonia emissions in the various farm systems. The biggest change is in the dairy systems, where the CSO data tells us we have fewer dairy farms than previously thought, but they are bigger. So emissions per farm are tending to be higher, but the per hectare levels tend to remain the same. And my colleagues will deal with these points in greater detail during the subsequent presentations, but I thought it was important to bring them to your attention at the start of the webinar. So I'm going to leave it at that. My colleagues will now go into more detail in the presentations, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing the latest statistics from the report. And I'll hand you back to Kevin now to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Director. Thank you for those very welcome remarks at the start about the role and importance of this report and the importance of NFS data underpinning it all. I'd like to encourage all the participants to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask questions that I'll be basically aggregating together and sharing between the presenters after their presentations are finished. We have a half an hour at the end of the hour and a half to talk through those Q&A points that you raise as participants. So that's me finished for a while. I'm going to hand you over to Trevor. Trevor, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for that, Kevin, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to take you through briefly through some policy developments that have happened since the publication of our previous report about 12 months ago. I think it's useful because it puts into context the work that we're doing here as part of this particular publication, and it helps to understand the relevance of why we're doing what we're doing. So just to emphasize as well, and we'll see this in the context of the way the results are presented, that we have a multidimensional definition of sustainability here. Sometimes we will see sustainability mentioned purely in an environmental context, but we're at pains to point out to people that we really need to give all three strands that we're talking about here, the economic, the environmental and social, and indeed the innovation metric, which Cathal will talk about as well when he gets into the detail of his presentation. We need to give those an adequate airing, and my colleague Emma will have a particular discussion on social sustainability metrics in a while. So just a reminder where our data is originating from. It's originating from the Teagasc National Farm Survey, which, while it began as a survey fundamentally about the economics of agriculture, from an Irish perspective has evolved now considerably to be a more fully fledged sustainability assessment. And we've been doing that now for several years, and it gives us the time series that the director referred to earlier, and that Cathal will actually show us shortly. So we regard it as an integrated approach, and that's important because we can't really think of any of these individual measures in isolation. So the integration of economic, social, and environmental data and understanding the interrelationship, the synergies, and the conflicts between those is fundamentally part of what we want to do in terms of this assessment. And this, as the director has mentioned, is where the EU in general is going to have to go in the coming years, as well as that transition for similar data collection exercises in other parts of Europe needs to expand to incorporate the environmental and social metrics that we already have access to in Ireland. So if we think about what's been happening over the last 12 months, it has been an eventful 12 months, I think it's reasonable to say, from the point of view of policy developments. We've seen the Climate Action Plan for 2021 published. We've seen, after a protracted period, the sectoral greenhouse gas mitigation targets finally being agreed by government. We've seen also the development of Food Vision 2030 implementation plan, and specifically of interest, I think, around that in the context of some of the environmental issues are the dairy and beef food vision committees, which have been established to look at the mitigation actions that could be brought to bear in respect of greenhouse gases. We've seen also at an EU level, Ireland's national Common Agricultural Policy Strategic Plan being accepted. And we've also seen, as well as was mentioned, some revisions to the way in which we do our calculations, and I'll round off the presentation by giving those a brief mention as well. So I'm just going to talk about these aspects here in a little bit more detail over the next 3 or 4 slides. So the Climate Action Plan 2021 was eventually published, and mitigation targets were finally agreed at the sectoral level. And what we learned out of that process is what agriculture now needs to do between here and 2030. And effectively, we're talking about a 25% reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions of the agriculture sector by 2030 compared to their level in 2018. So that's a reduction from the 23 million tonnes reported in 2018 to a level of about 17.25 million tonnes to be achieved by 2030. So considerable methane and nitrous oxide emission reduction measures will need to be brought to bear in order to achieve that sort of a reduction target. We've also seen the Food Vision 2030 implementation plan launched that has a large number of goals which it aims to achieve, and they're brought together under the banner of 4 high-level missions for the sector, dealing with the development of a climate-smart agriculture, a sector that's viable and resilient, and providing incomes for the producers that work in the sector, and providing them with a good standard of living to enhance their well-being. There's also the focus on producing safe, trusted food that's valued not alone by consumers here in Ireland, but also by the majority of consumers of Irish food who happen to be people living in other countries. And finally, we want the sector to be innovative, competitive, and resilient. And that's also a focus of the mission of the Food Vision 2030. Now, specifically, one of the challenges that is faced in agriculture is to address the issue of greenhouse gas emissions and the targets that have emerged. So 2 groups have been established to focus on that already, a dairy group and a beef group. And they're composed of stakeholders from farm organizations, the food industry, government, and researchers who are expert in that area as well. And the aim there is to identify measures that can contribute to initially stabilizing and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a lot of work happening in the background there. Really, the purpose of these slides here is to give people who wouldn't have maybe the same familiarity with what is going on in agriculture, just to bring them up to speed with where things are at. So also we see that Ireland's National CAP Strategic Plan has now been accepted. So that will roll into play from the 1st of January next year, after some queries from the European Commission and some amendments. It has finally been accepted by the Commission in August, and the Irish government also approved it in early October. So the final version of the CAP Strategic Plan reflects updates in light of the observations made by the European Commission. And those observations basically were about trying to get a better alignment of what is in the plan with the 10 specific CAP objectives, 3 of them each relating to the environment, social and economic challenges that are faced by agriculture, and then a final cross-cutting objective which is focused around knowledge and innovation. And obviously the key policy documents at an EU level, the Green Deal, the European Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy, and the biodiversity strategy are very important in the context of that particular plan. And just to remind people, this new CAP is a different CAP, to a different kind of animal to the previous CAPs. It's one that is more targeted in terms of the CAP spending, with a greater environmental focus, in particular an environmental focus in Pillar 1, which is the bigger portion of the CAP, which has an environmental focus that it probably didn't really have previously. There's also this notion of results-based orientation. So it's shifting from a situation where farmers are complying with rules to the actual delivery of positive desired outcomes. And of course, all of that requires that we need better indicators to show us what's actually happening in agriculture, because if we have those better indicators, we will be better able to determine what is happening sooner and take corrective action where necessary, and do that in a way that is targeted to deliver the best value for money, and ensuring ultimately that those policies are effective. So looking at our sustainability report for 2021, which Cathal will go through in detail in a few minutes. A reminder to people that it focuses on 4 farm systems: dairy, cattle, sheep, and tillage. So we take our farms and the farm population and categorize them into one of those particular categories. One of the things people need to remember about Irish agriculture is that very often farmers will be producing more than one agricultural output. So there's a bit of work involved in that. We have to determine what the primary output of each of these farms actually is, and then categorize them accordingly in respect of that. We have our 4 sustainability dimensions: economic, environmental, social, and innovation, giving us a total, I think the running total, and a moment to correction on this from Cathal, I think we have about 129 indicators in the 2021 report, possibly more now, given that Emma is going to report on some additional social metrics as well later in this webinar. Temporal dimension, also very important. When we began this process a number of years ago, we didn't have that temporal dimension because we had just begun to collect this data. But one of the real positive aspects, I think, about this work is that we now have the capacity to look at what is happening over a series of years. And that is important because we will see one-year changes from happening in agriculture here and there, which are down to shocks basically in the sector, either due to high prices or low prices, or unusually good or unusually bad weather. And these can tend to move around some of the metrics we look at. So really we need to be looking at a longer term trend rather than year X versus year Y, really, when we're trying to establish what we see is going on. And as Cathal will talk about in a while, we also use a rolling average type of approach, as well as producing annual figures. The rolling average approach tries to smooth out the bumps in the road so we can see the longer term trend a bit more clearly. And it should be worth mentioning as well, of course, that what Cathal will present today is only a small subset of the totality of the results. Finally, just to mention what the director has already mentioned, and that is there are some changes to the historical figures we have published included in this year's report. So I mentioned we have a time series that goes back in time, and what we have actually done is to revise data from 2017 through to 2020 in light of the publication of the Agricultural Census 2020. So that agricultural census gave us better information on the number of farms we have in the country, the types of farms we have in the country, and the typical size of those farms in the country. And why that data is important is that it provides us with the weights that we use for our sample of farms in the National Farm Survey. So the National Farm Survey is made nationally representative by applying the weights to the individual farms that are surveyed in the National Farm Survey. And those revisions have been applied for the years 2017 to 2020 because we haven't had accurate weights available to us for a few years now. So these revisions are included in the sustainability report for 2021. Now, this is something that happens on a routine basis, and we generally don't talk about it because it leads to, in general, unremarkable revisions in the data. But it just so happens that on this occasion, the changes are a bit more significant that they would warrant commentary in respect of the dairy sector. And essentially what I'm saying is that the increase in dairy activity that we've seen in the period since the milk quota was eliminated means that there has been quite a bit of structural change in dairy relative to the last snapshot we had, which was for 2016. So the revised weights, when we implement those in terms of our data for dairy farms, they show us that we have, as the director mentioned, fewer dairy farms than previously thought. We see that a greater percentage of the dairy farms are in larger size categories, and the implication of that ultimately is that the average dairy farm, which is what Cathal will be talking about in many cases, we're talking about averages just for convenience in terms of reporting the results, but our average dairy farm size is larger than previously thought, to the tune of about 3 or 4 dairy cows. So what we see is our dairy farms are larger, but we have fewer of them. So the totality, we'll say, of dairy emissions or dairy output or dairy income isn't changed by this revision. It's just that the average for a farm is actually showing as larger because we have now a larger farm size, basically, on average than we thought previously. So just something to keep in mind during the course of the presentation. And it really means as well that to have the most up-to-date information on the path of these emissions, you really need to be looking at this new report that's coming out today. So I think I will leave it at that point and pass you back to Kevin.
Thanks a million, Trevor. I think I was really clear setting out of the context, both in terms of the methodology we're using and some of the changes that are important to keep in your mind's eye as you read through the report in due course and listen to Cathal talk. So Cathal, I'm going to again shut up and I'll let you get on with providing some more of the detail of the report that people will be able to shortly download from the Teagasc website.
Thanks, Kevin. So as the director and Trevor has said, this is the 7th iteration of the sustainability report. We started off, it was every second year, and the last since 2020 we've done it every year. So it's important to do it every year so we can see the year-on-year changes, but also the long-term trend. By way of overview, I'm going to go through the conceptual framework, go through the methodology, outline some of the results, and then offer some summary conclusions and discussion points. Okay, so in terms of sustainability, our conceptual framework, as Trevor said, we've conceptualized it, and it was well established in literature as having three dimensions: economic, environmental, social, more or less like a three-legged stool. We're also including innovation in our framework. It's kind of like a stabilizer for the three legs of the stool, and where those three legs are stable, we can say the farm system is sustainable. Where one of the legs is not stable, then you risk of failure. And as Trevor has said, no one dimension is more important than the other. You have to think of the system as holistically as an integrated different dimensions. So essentially, sustainability, sustainable agriculture is nested between those four dimensions, and that's how we think of sustainability in this report. Okay, just to start, I suppose, with the sample with data in 2021. We're reporting across four main systems, and then the all farm basis: dairy, cattle, sheep, and tillage. In 2021, 821 farms representing 83,000, nearly 84,000 farms nationally. A few things, I suppose, to note. It's important when interpreting, when I'm trying to interpret the results later on, is that the average farm size in dairy and tillage farms is significantly higher than for dry stock farms. So it kind of shows that the per hectare, things like per hectare emissions are not, the gap isn't as wide as on a farm basis because these farms are larger. Also take note that even though we've classified them as sheep and tillage farms and dairy farms, there are significant livestock units, cattle-based livestock units on these farms. And that's important also when we look at the emission profile and of some of the non-cattle farms. On the dairy side, a lot of those cattle units relate to replacements, but we don't classify them as dairy livestock units until they actually come into the dairy herd and start milking, essentially. And finally, then the livestock, the farm stocking rate, you can see that dairy farms tend to be operating more intensely at higher stocking rates than the other farm systems, 2.1 grassland stocking rate versus 1.2, 1.2, 1.4 for the others. Okay, just some housekeeping, I guess. If you see a graph like this, we're showing the 90% distribution. The box in the middle is the interquartile range, the 25th to the 75th percentile. The line in the middle is the median. That box is not always uniform. It can be up or down. So it's just going to give you a range of the distribution of the results. The tails in at the end are the 90th and the 10th percentile. When you see a box plot like that, we've broken up the results by farm system, by top, middle, and bottom, essentially by economics, by gross margin, top 1/3, middle 1/3, and bottom 1/3. When you see a box plot like this, or a graph like this, the blue is always the dairy, the orange, red is always the cattle, the purple is the sheep, and the green is the tillage. And when you see a graph like this, we've done a 3-year rolling average. Why have we done that? Trevor has kind of mentioned before. We're looking to try and establish long-term trends. So this kind of nets out some of the noise from a kind of positive or negative price of weather shocks. So it's really trying to look at get a smoothing to look at, is there a long-term trend in the data? Okay, so starting with the first leg of the stool, the economic sustainability. We report on 2, I suppose, land-based economic return to land-based measures, gross margin and gross output. 2 relate to income, family farm income per hectare. And family farm income is income, it's revenue after fixed and variable costs have been taken out of. The other one is the income per unpaid labor unit. So, you know, there's a lot of labor on these farms. So, you know, paid labor is regarded as a cost, but the unpaid family labor is not. So we're looking at returns that unpaid family labor in our indicator. The last 2 then are market orientation, how much of the output is derived from market versus subsidies. And the final one then is economic viability. It's a 1-0 yes, no. And farmers have to be viable if they can return the minimum wage for the unpaid labor employed, which was 10.20 in 2021, and give a 5% return on non-land-based assets. It's kind of a 1-0 binary yes, no criteria. Okay, so getting into results then for the I suppose for the returns to land, you've got the gross output, gross margin, and family farm income per hectare. You can see, look at dairying is significantly ahead of the other farm systems, tillage being second, and the dry stock systems coming in at the rear. That's not a new story, essentially. You can see that, you know, the long-term trend is well established, and that dairying has been powering ahead in terms of the economic powerhouse of all the farm systems. If anything, the gap is slightly increasing in recent times, dairy versus the others. And tillage is always, you know, then between dairy and the dry stock systems. But one thing I just want to note also, and this is the distribution of income of dairy farms, income per hectare for dairy farms, top, middle, and bottom. So you see on the previous 2, the left and the right, you see there's a significant variability across farm systems. But from the box plot in the middle, you can see there's also a significant variability or heterogeneity within farm systems. So the average tends to hide a lot. So even within systems, you're seeing significant variability of results. Okay, the next economic indicator is productivity of labor. This is income per unpaid family labor unit. And now we actually get a bit of that convergence here between dairy and tillage in 2021. You can see that, you know, they're actually quite level in terms of income per unpaid labor unit. That's because there's a significant amount of more labor required in dairying versus tillage. And when you include that extra labor, you get an equalization effect between the 2 systems. The dry stock systems are clearly obviously lagging behind as previously shown. The long-term trend is dairying is still ahead of tillage farms on a 3-year rolling average basis. And both of them have been tracking upwards in recent times, significantly ahead of the dry stock systems. You can see there who are at around 15 and 20 generally in terms of returns per unpaid labor unit. Again, just want to make the point about heterogeneity. You know, there's variability across systems, cattle, sheep, tillage, and dairy, but also within the systems, as you can see there from the results of the box plot results at the bottom. So, you know, the average can hide an awful lot. So you need to interpret the data or dig a bit deeper in terms of, you know, where the distribution is, because the average can sometimes hide some of the variability within the farm system. Final economic one then is viability. As I said, it's a binary yes, no. If they can meet the minimum, give minimum wage for unpaid labor and 5% return on non-land-based assets, then they're viable. Again, it's the results in 2021 are similar to long-term trend in terms of dairy farms being most viable, 80-85% in long-term trend. Tillage being at around 75-80%, whereas the dry stock farms tend to be around between 20-25% on average over the series. Okay, so moving on to the second leg of the sustainability stool, which is social sustainability. Again, we have six metrics here. First 3 relate to household structures. So the first one is household vulnerability. It's a one. All these 3 are binary, 1-0 yes, no. So a farm is said to be non-viable if it's not economically viable, based on the previous slide, and there's no off-farm income in the household. So if it doesn't meet those two criteria, then it's said to be vulnerable. If a farmer lives alone, it's an isolation risk. And if a farmer is over 50 years of age, and there's no member in the household under 45 years of age, then the household is said to be a high age profile household. Fourth one is whether a farmer has agricultural education, some sort of formal education or training. The final one then relates to hours worked on the farm, and then total hours worked, which is on and off farm hours total. I'm not going to dwell too much on these because Emma's going to dig a little deeper in terms of the social sustainability indicators next. But the results for the social sustainability tends to be the reverse of, or it tends to be the corollary of what's happening on the economic side. You know, but you have the dairy and the tillage being less vulnerable than the sheep and cattle systems. So essentially, it's kind of a flip of what's happening on the economic side. The final ones I want to touch on are the hours worked. So you can see in 2021, you know, dairy farmers, this is the main farm holder, working about 2,500 hours versus about 1,500 for the other systems. But if you include off-farm employment, which there's an awful lot of in the cattle dry stock and some on the tillage side, also a little bit on the dairy side, by the way, the gap narrows. You know, they're working at about 2.5 on 2,250 on the non-dairy side, and you're looking at 2,600, 2,700 on the dairy side. I just want to say, like, in terms of sustainability, you know, we said it is the three pillars to sustainability, and social is a strong pillar. The amount of hours being worked in some of on the average dairy farm is creeping up, and you know it's significant. And one would have to question the sustainability of the hours being worked in the longer term. Okay, so the final leg of the stool is the environmental sustainability, and okay, we have two indicators, or two, I suppose, classes of indicators in the gaseous emissions category: greenhouse gases and ammonia. For greenhouse gases, we're modeling ag and energy using the IPCC National Inventories Framework for all farms. We also have a life cycle assessment, LCA model for dairy, based on work developed in more part by Donald O'Brien, Lawrence Shalhoub, and more recently Jonathan Hearn. For the ammonia model, for the ammonia indicators, we were using the national inventories approach, replicating what the EPA do essentially when they account for ammonia. For water quality, we're using a farm gate input-output approach, tracking inputs versus outputs and seeing what's left over. Essentially, this gives us balances and use efficiencies for both nitrogen and phosphorus. And we are in, look, I've been saying it for a few years, but we are in development of a biodiversity indicator. John Finn gave an update last year. We're waiting for we have a framework kind of ready to go. We're waiting for the National Habitats Map to be published so we can get on with developing it to the National Farm Survey, and hopefully next year we might have something to show on this. Okay, so we have about 16 indicators on the environmental side. We have for agricultural and energy GHG, we have emissions per farm, per hectare, per kilogram of output, and per kilogram per euro of output generated. So it's absolute emissions and emissions intensity. For ammonia, again, per farm, per hectare, per kg of main product, be it milk, meat, or live weight sheep or beef, and per euro of output. And for the water quality and balance, P-balance, and use efficiencies. Okay, so as the director said, I just want to flag methodological update from previous report. As the IPCC's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as a state of knowledge improves, so they make recommendations in terms of how to update the scientific basis for calculating emissions. So they published a report went from AR4 to AR5. The assessment report it means AR. And the director has said it's been changed in the global warming potentials of methane and nitrous oxide. So to say that carbon dioxide is the base gas, and convert methane and nitrous oxide into CO2 equivalents, put everything into a common base or a common currency, so we can compare, like, for kind of get an overall idea of the total emissions. So between AR4 and AR5, the CO2, it remains the base gas 1:1. As the director said, methane has increased. It was 1 ton of methane to 25 tons, equal to 25 tons of methane. It's gone from 1 ton to 28 tons in AR5. For nitrous oxide, there's been a decrease. It was 1 ton of nitrous oxide equals 298 tons of CO2 equivalent. This has decreased to 265. This has been adopted by the EPA and the national inventories this year, so we've replicated this to follow pace in terms of how the national inventories are calculated. So the time series has been adjusted and backcasted. So previous reports are not the most up-to-date information we have. So if you're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, it's a time series in this year's report you'll have to refer to. And the net impact, because we're such a livestock based agricultural sector, the net impact has been an increase in CO2 emissions on the back of this methane. The methane change essentially outweighed the nitrous oxide change, and it's led to an increase in CO2 emissions over the time series. Okay, so looking at the GHG emissions per farm and per hectare, again, this is what we call absolute measures. And then we're also going to look at a per kilogram of output, main output. So this is kind of the carbon footprint per meat, milk, sheep meat, and so on, and per euro of output. Okay, so starting at the farm level, so we're estimating that the dairy farms on average produced 614 tons of CO2 equivalent in 2021. This was 3.5 to 4 times larger than the other farm systems. So you can see that it's significantly bigger based on the level of level of intensity it's operating at. Another thing to note, I guess, is if you look at the tillage and the sheep farms, but especially for tillage, the majority of the GHG emissions are actually coming from cattle enterprise on a tillage farm, and a lot of tillage farms have a second or third enterprise, beef and sheep, and you can see it's essentially driving the emissions on these tillage farms. Sheep farms, again, a lot of them have a cattle enterprise. It's about 45% of the emissions are coming from this cattle enterprise on sheep farms. What's the long-term trend at the farm scale? Well, look, you can see fairly clearly there, like since our time series starts in the middle of the quotas were abolished, 2014 to 16. We're seeing a significant upward trend on farm level dairy emissions and farm level emissions on dairy farms. On the non-dairy farms, at the farm scale, they're being relatively static over the time period. So the all farm average has trended up really on the back of what's been happening on the dairy side. However, as I said earlier, dairy farms tend to be larger than livestock farms, so the gap, I suppose, the relative gap at a per hectare level isn't as wide as it is at farm scale. It's about 2.5 times larger on dairy farms than livestock farms. The gap remains the same within tillage because the two are similar in size, farm size. I suppose, and then on a per hectare basis, the increase in emissions is not as pronounced as on the farm scale, again, because dairy farms tend to be larger and they have more hectares which to distribute the emissions over. So although it's trending upwards, it's not at the same degree, I suppose, as at the farm scale. And the non-dairy farm emissions, again, relatively stable over the time period. If you look at it, agricultural greenhouse gases per euro of output, per revenue generating capacity, story kind of flips in a way, and that dairy is second best because, okay, they have high level of emissions, but they also have very high revenue generating capacity, whereas the cattle and sheep farms, they have emissions, but they're very low level of revenue generating capacity to dilute those emissions over. Okay, so we've seen where the increase in emissions it's been essentially coming from the dairy sector. So I want to dig a little bit deeper what's driving those absolute emissions. So you can actually break down the dairy farm emissions into 3 components. The first component is kilograms of milk produced per cow, and we're using a standard kilogram of milk, which is standardized at 4% fat and 3.3% protein. So you can see over the time series, there's more the kilograms of milk produced per cow is going up. So there's more milk being produced per cow, which is good. It's an efficiency gain. The second element, second part of the equation is the footprint of that milk. So you can see from with a spike in the middle of the study period, but since then it's been trending downwards. So in recent times, the carbon footprint of that milk has been declining, which is good. It's also an efficiency gain. But it's the third component essentially which has been driving the increase in absolute emissions in dairy farms. It's the herd size. You can see it's fairly linear increase there. It's come from about 70, the average herd size of about 70 to close to 90 cows on average over a 3-year rolling average. And that's essentially overriding the efficiency gains from the first two parts of the equation, the milk per cow and the footprint. And just to say, if we hadn't made those efficiency gains in the footprint and the output per cow, the absolute emissions actually will be larger than they are currently. I mentioned earlier, we also have an LCA approach for dairy based on the Moorpark model developed by Donal O'Brien, Lawrence Shalhoub, and Jonathan Hearn. And this is the comparison. Same model is used by Board BIA in their SDAS, their quality assurance scheme for dairy, sustainable dairy insurance scheme. And because the model is the same, okay, the data is collected in a slightly different way. We've done some cross validation, look at how the results compare. And this is the farm average, and it tracks quite closely on an average dairy farm basis. But if you actually weight it for milk supply, so if you treat the 15,000 dairy farms in the NFS as one big farm, and same in Board BIA for all their assessments, you actually get a very nearly a mirror of the results are mirroring each other, which is good external validity for both methods. Okay, we're also looking at the carbon footprint of beef and sheep. It's based on kilograms of CO2 per live weight beef and sheep. For beef, it tends to be the carbon footprint has been declining over the study period. For sheep, it was declining. It's increased in recent times, and there's a couple of reasons for that in terms of profitability in the sheep sector and increased level of activity that went on there, and the lag period between that and when the output happens. So that might adjust itself as time goes by. Also, I meant to say that again, the average is high a lot here. This is distribution of results between the top, middle, and bottom for beef and sheep. So you can see, there's a huge range of results around the mean. Okay, so moving on for ammonia. The ammonia, again, we have per farm and per hectare, which is the absolute emissions, and we have emissions intensity per kg of output, meat and so on, and euro per euro of output, revenue. Look, the story is similar to greenhouse gases. Dairy farms are generating 3.5 to 4 times more ammonia at a farm scale, and most of it, 75% of dairy ammonia is driven by dairy milk production. Again, similar to GHG on tillage and sheep farms, the majority of the emissions are coming from cattle enterprise on those farms. On the long-term trend, okay, we're actually seeing some green shoots when it comes to ammonia in the last 2 years. We're starting to see the tide being turned and decline in ammonia emissions at the farm scale. What's driving that essentially is the practice change. I'm going to mention it earlier on in terms of low emission slurry spreading and so on. So look, there are definitely some green shoots on the ammonia side. The gap between the farm scale is not, on a per hectare basis, it's not as large as it is at a farm scale because dairy farms are larger. So it's about 2.5 times that of dry flock systems versus 3.5 on the per farm scale. And again, on the time series, we're starting to see on a per hectare basis the turning of the tide a little bit in for ammonia. Again, on the back of practice change. Okay, so the final couple of indicators I'm going to cover are water quality. So the balance basically, water quality is a tricky one because an awful lot depends on the local biophysical environment, and the hydrological pathways and so on. But all other things being equal, the nitrogen and phosphorus balance are indicator of the risk to water quality locally. How do you calculate a balance? Essentially, you're tracking what comes into the system. You're putting everything into a kg of phosphorus and nitrogen in terms of how much is coming in feeds, fertilizers, organic manure, seeds, and so on. And what's going out the far side in meat, milk, crops, and so on. And whatever's left over is either a surplus or deficit, and this gives you your balance in terms and risk, I suppose, local or kind of indicator of pressure locally. The second, I suppose, the others are nitrogen use efficiency and phosphorus use efficiency, which essentially is an agronomic measure of how much of the nitrogen and phosphorus is being retained within the farm system and turned into product, essentially. So if if a farm had 50% nitrogen use efficiency, then half of the nitrogen is being retained within the farm system and exiting a product, for example. In terms of the results for the end balance, look, it's kind of similar scale in terms of what's happening on the gaseous emission side, and that dairying balances are 3 to 4 times larger than the other farm systems, and the trend is that trend is very well established. It can go up and down based on weather drives a lot here. Soil is local hydrology drives a lot, but all other things being equal, dairy tends to be order of magnitude higher in terms of imbalances than the other systems. When it looks at use efficiency, you can, it's again how much of the nitrogen or phosphorus has been retained within the farm system. And you tend to get higher results here for tillage because the nitrogen is not cycling to an animal essentially. So it always tends to be higher, in 2020, 2021, but also on the long-term trend. But we are seeing in recent times, like the dairy farmers achieving 25% nitrogen use efficiency and increasing. So there are some positive signs on the use efficiency side in the last couple of years. Okay, the last couple of slides I mentioned before that we conceptually are saying our three-legged stool. We have the three legs or 3 dimensions, but we also have innovation as a stabilizer. And one of the things that was heavily promoted by us in the say for example the ammonia MAC document was use of low emission slurry spreading and adoption of protected urea fertilizer. So in terms of less, we're seeing at a farm scale. We're seeing some significant movement here across particularly dairy, but replicated across all farms as well. So from about 2018 to 2021, we've seen rapid adoption of low emission slurry spreading. On the average farm, about 67% of average dairy farm, 67% of slurry is applied by LS method, 25% for cattle. And if you put all the farms together, you're looking at about 33%. That's the average farm basis. Now, I don't want to confuse a little bit, but if you look at if you apply it on an aggregate basis, what do I mean by aggregate? Okay, you treat the 15,000 dairy farm, 15 or 16,000 dairy farms as one big dairy farm, and all the slurry supplied in those put aggregated together, and how much of that was applied by low emission slurry spreading, it increases to 74%, 27% in cattle, and 48% across all farms. So in that spaces, whatever is 48% of slurry manure that's stored in slurry form was applied as low emission via low emission slurry in 2021. And look at it, it's been a rapid increase since 2018. So farmers have to be acknowledged for that, and that's leading to some good news story on the ammonia side. The other one I'm going to mention is protected urea. Look at the increase is there, but it's a less positive story, we'll say, than less. It's gone from a zero base in 2018 to about, on an average farm basis, 3% of all 3% of all chemical fertilizer was applied in protected urea form. 7% on dairy farms. Again, if you look at the aggregate, which treats all the dairy farms as one big one, and all the farms, 3,000 farms in the NFS, represented in the NFS is one big farm, going up to about 5% across all farms. So it's on the increase, but we'd really like it to be increasing a little bit faster and more in line with what's happening on the left side. So there's some good news, but look, we need to push it maybe a bit further on the protected urea side. One leading to my final slides on the liming rates. Look at the liming rates jumped significantly in 2021, and there's a couple of negative and positive consequences to this. The negative side is that this increased the liming emissions, because lime emits carbon dioxide directly. So on the short run, it led to an increase in this category of emissions, but on the long run, hopefully it'll improve soil fertility and pH. We saw from soil samples taken in 2021 and in Teagasc, like 33,000 surveys report by Mark Plunkett, David Wall, and Pat Murphy, that something like 50% of soil samples taken were not at optimum pH, and only about 16% were optimum for pH, P and K. So hopefully by liming is the first step in addressing that deficit, which will help, I suppose, improve nutrient recovery in the future, and maybe less chemical fertilizer need to be applied. Okay, in conclusion then, on the economic and social metrics, the dairying performs the strongest, and the livestock systems are the most challenged. Look, in terms of absolute GHG emissions in 2021, there continues to be an increase on the dairy farms, at farm scale, driven by increased herd size and increased liming rates. Other farm systems are waltzed up slightly in 2021 on the back of increased liming rates and slightly increased stocking rate. Some green shoots when it comes to ammonia, in decline on a per farm per hectare basis compared to the preceding years. The intensity of production, also, the emissions footprint, either GHG or ammonia per kg of milk and meat, tend to improve. And on the innovation metrics, the use of low emission slurry spreading has increased significantly. Predicted urea has remained. It's increased also, but it's a slow burner, and we've seen a significant increase in liming rates, which have had a direct effect on GHG emissions, but hopefully will prove beneficial in the longer run. So that's me done, Kevin. That's my email. The report will be published on the Teagasc website today, but also it will be put on that link there, which is the link to the previous 6 reports. But as I said, the most recent one is the most up to date in terms of time series due to methodological developments. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks a million, Cathal. That was an awful lot of data, a lot of indicators, a lot of information, and I'd encourage everybody on the call to go to the Teagasc website and download the report. And if you need any questions answered about the report, contact Cathal directly, or any of the other, or Trevor, who's the other author on the report. I'd also just to take the opportunity before I head over to Emma to encourage everybody or anybody who's got a question about the information that Trevor and Cathal have gone through, or that Emma is going to present in a minute on the social sustainability indicators, to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen and send in a question. And if I can answer it quickly, I will. But if I can't, I'll direct it to one of the presenters. Okay, Emma, over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. So at the risk of throwing even more data at you, my focus for the next 10 minutes is to look at some of the additional social sustainability metrics that we have collected in the NFS in 2021. And also to have a quick discussion around indicator development generally in the social space, what we've done over the last number of years through additional surveys, and where we'd like to get to, I suppose, on a more regular basis. So not to labour the point, but a sustainable food system is profitable throughout. Economic sustainability has broad-based benefits for society, social sustainability, and has a positive or neutral impact on the natural environment, environmental sustainability. And so in recent years, we've seen a real momentum towards adopting systems approaches to bring consumption and production together to achieve sustainable development through this integrated approach to food systems. And so Trevor has, I suppose, somewhat covered this as well around the evolving policy landscape in which we're operating. But I just wanted to reiterate the point that the holistic nature of sustainability is increasingly being recognised, and it's particularly evident in agricultural policy, but even policy more broadly. And so we think about the Sustainable Development Goals, the EU Farm to Fork strategy, and our own National Agri-Food Vision 2030. And so I suppose the CAP supports the continued development of social sustainability indicators, and the policy itself has long recognised the role of agriculture in society in providing essential services for citizens, and also its role in rural viability, and in turn it would support farmers to do this. So I think what we've seen in the new CAP is the widening focus of those objectives. And if we look at the graphic here with the 9 objectives, generally you can think about them in terms of 3 economic, 3 environmental, and 3 social. And so the social are here around the broad-ranging societal challenges that we have in the context of agriculture and in rural development generally, around the ageing population, the viability of rural areas and access to services, and food and health. But I suppose it's important to make the point that these dimensions are overlapping, and that there is a social dimension to both the economic and environmental dimensions also, and that environmental actions are designed to be socially sustainable. And obviously it's important for a sustainable farm household to have farm income, that they are both economically, socially, and indeed environmentally sustainable. And so really through the new CAP and the new performance monitoring and evaluation framework, we need data-driven solutions to tackle some of these issues and to come up with solutions indeed to foster resilience and support for farm households throughout Europe. And so metrics are required, and increasingly so social metrics. And this is something that the FADN will have to embrace in its transition to the FSDN to take account more so of these kind of variables. And so that brings me to a general overview of what the Farm Survey is and what it sits within the EU FADN. And so traditionally, the FADN was designed to collect physical and structural data on farms and economic and financial data. So it gave us very much the economic focus and the technical and financial performance of farms. And so we've discussed about the indicator evolution that we've seen, particularly in an Irish context, but also in some other member states to a lesser extent, and in the Netherlands in particular, to better take account of the environmental sustainability dimension. So we have this broader remit within the NFS that goes outside the core FADN dataset to try and measure both the environmental and social sustainability in addition to the economic performance. But I suppose it is important to acknowledge that it's quite challenging to measure some of these social sustainability issues and topics within such a framework. And that, you know, sometimes some of these issues can be somewhat subjective, and at other times, some of the discussion can perhaps be sensitive. And so it's important to take account of that. Within the Food Vision 2030 document, the need to better take account of social factors and the need to improve them is recognised. And the NFS has been identified as a vehicle to do that. And some of the variables that are mentioned within the document centre around generational renewal, gender balance, and also health and safety and well-being. So we'll discuss where we're getting to in the collection and the reporting of some of that data. Okay, so an overview then of how to measure social sustainability and the progress we've made in this regard. In a general sense, social sustainability can be considered as a measure of human welfare, specifying and managing both positive and negative impacts of systems, processes, and organizations and activities on people and social life. And we've made some progress within Teagasc in the last number of years and within the NFS through some PhD research by my colleague Mary Brennan. And some of the literature has led us to think about the social sustainability dimension within both internal and external components. And so we can think about the internal dimension as being pertaining to issues around well-being, physical and psychological, demographic viability, education, working conditions for the farmer, families and employees. And some of this is accounted for within the core FADN and NFS data that we collect every year, and some of which Cathal has presented to you already. And also in terms of social sustainability, we need to think about the more external factors, so community-oriented issues around values, concerns, and the demands of wider rural society. And one key one there is around animal health and welfare. The use of antibiotics gets quite a bit of coverage. Generational renewal and succession on farms. And we know that the latest census data has revealed, you know, worrying trends around the aging demographic of not just Irish farmers, but it's an issue across Europe. So there are many issues to be considered within this social sustainability sphere. So much of this additional data that we've collected around social sustainability, we have done through additional surveys of the NFS every number of years. And so in 2021, we added questions around a number of dimensions. And so generally I've grouped them together and I'm going to present some of these to you today. First is around health and well-being. Connectivity was also discussed around internet access, farmer engagement with smartphones, etc. Social engagement, contact outside of the farm household, and also farm labour, and included in that the role of females in farm work. Okay, so firstly then around health and well-being. So in the 2021 survey, farmers were asked around their farm business related stress and had they experienced that, or what degree they had experienced it too within the last 5 years, and how that had worsened in the last 5 years. And so overall then in 2021, 38% of farmers reported stress relating to the farm business in the past 5 years. And there was some coverage last week of a report coming out of UCD, where a similar level of stress and anxiety was reported within that survey also. So looking at it then across the systems, 55% of dairy farmers reported stress in the last 5 years relating to the farm business. And the figure was approximately a quarter to 1/3 across the other farm systems. So that's the green bar. If we look at the orange bar, we can see that there has been a significant deterioration over time, particularly across the livestock systems. So, close to 50%, 40 to 50% are reporting a deterioration in their stress levels relating to their farm business in the last 5 years. Interestingly, we collected this data previously in 2018, and we did see that data indicated a higher incidence of stress, but it was a particularly challenging year, as we all remember, and some of the key drivers in 2018 were around weather, workload, and finance. In 2021, we also asked farmers around their self-reported health, and the overall result, I suppose, is that 78% of farmers themselves report good or very good health, or they did so in 2021, and that this was highest amongst tillage farmers. But I suppose the sheep figure stands out there, with about 31% of sheep farmers reporting poor or fair health. So between 1/4 and 1/3 of dry stock farmers had poorer health reported in 2021, compared to about 1 in 10 of the dairy or tillage farmers. An additional question then was around the existence of replacement labour on those farms should the person be unable to work. And again, sheep farmers fared quite poorly, with 31% of them not having an identified replacement. And overall, across systems, about half of farmers stated that they had no replacement labour in the event of them not being available. Moving on to connectivity then, and one element of that was asking farmers around their use of smartphones. And in line with the general population, I think there was a study in 2019 looking at smartphone usage in Ireland, and the figure was about 90% of people were now using smartphones. So in 2021, we saw that 76% of farmers were using smartphones, compared to only 20% in 2015. So we've seen a dramatic change there in the last number of years. And even up from 2019, when that was last asked, so you could see potentially the impact of COVID in potentially speeding up that process. So overall, smartphone usage was about 70% across all systems, highest amongst dairy and tillage farmers in 2021. And I suppose it's important to provide some context on this. We know the average age of farmers, and they tend to be older for these dry stock farms. So maybe you would expect perhaps the usage to be a little bit lower on those farms on average. So aligned to that then, we asked about internet access across farm households. And again, this was a question that was asked by the CSO in 2021, and over 90%, it was 93% of households generally in the population had access to the internet. So the farm household figure from our survey is about 88%, so it's quite close. And we have seen a steady increase in internet access and utilisation amongst farm households. We first asked this question in 2011. You can see there's been an increase since then in the last 10 years, and even an increase evident since the onset of the COVID pandemic, which this question was asked before in 2019. When we look at this data a little bit deeper, and we look at the types of tools that farmers are using the internet for farm businesses, we see that dairy farmers are more likely to use ICT for their farm business than some of the others. But this is data that we're looking at the moment, and we will hopefully be writing up in the near future. There was also a question asked about the quality of internet access, and 57% reported good or very good access, broadly similar across the systems, with about 28% reporting average quality and 15% poor or very poor. So another aspect of the COVID-19 pandemic was the move to online livestock marts. And so we added a question in the 2021 survey around farmers' utilisation of this tool. And so we do see a behavioural change evident around livestock mart participation, with 2/3 of farmers across all systems watching the mart online during the pandemic, and over half buying or selling in this way across all the systems. But you can see there, the green bar is across the systems, the proportion of farmers who bought or sold online. So a little bit higher on the dairy and cattle compared to the sheep. I suppose one element there is that some of the the stock may be sold to the factory directly. And also the cattle, other and sheep farmers tended to be a little bit older on average than the others. So that might be a reason there too. But I suppose also interesting to see that 83% of farmers plan to continue buying and selling online. So I suppose there has been this behavioural shift there that it looks set to continue. And also we looked at this on a full-time and part-time basis. And as you'd expect, part-time farmers were more likely to be engaged with the online livestock market also. Okay, a final slide around social engagement. And again, there's quite a lot here going on in terms of the lines, but let's just focus on the general message. We asked farmers in 2018 their frequency of contact with people outside of their household, and we asked that question again in 2021. And what we saw was a deterioration in terms of daily contact across systems. So sheep farmers, for example, was the most dramatic. So 73% of sheep farmers in 2018 saw somebody on a daily basis, and this figure fell to just 52% in 2021. But there is a drop across the other systems as well, with the dairy and the cattle other in particularly falling about 10 percentage points to about 50%. So about half of the farmers, the dairy and cattle other farms, seeing somebody on a daily basis. And so subsequently then you see an increase in the proportion of farmers who are only seeing people maybe 2 to 3 times a week in particular. But I think it's also interesting to look at the once per week figure. So if we look at 2018, these figures are quite low, about 5% of farmers only across the systems only seeing somebody once a week. But this has grown significantly in 2021. Hopefully that has come back in 2022. But you can see, for example, that 1 in 10 dairy farmers in 2021 only saw somebody outside of their household once a week. Similar figures on the cattle other and the sheep, 11 and 9%, a little bit lower on the cattle other. Important to say also that you will have some a higher degree of farmers working off farm and some of the cattle and sheep systems, although some of them are older and there's a good degree of pensions on those farms too. But I think interesting to see that change in terms of daily contact across farm systems over the course of the last number of years. Okay, finally then, first of all, in terms of farm labour, and Cathal has already spoken about this, about the workload on farm. So this graph here looks at family labour hours, so the annual hours worked on a dairy farm by the family. So it's the unpaid component. So Cathal mentioned the figure, it's about 2,500 on the average dairy farm. But this also takes account here, this graph of the size. So the average dairy farm, as was already mentioned, is about 66 hectares, and the tillage about 65, with the cattle and sheep significantly lower, between 35 and 40. So that's one thing to note. The other element of interest is around female labour input on dairy farms. And we know from the 2020 census that about 13% of farms have a female manager holder. And from the NFS data, we can look at the proportion of farms with female labour input. And interestingly, the dairy and sheep farms have the relatively higher proportion of female labour input. So reiterating, I suppose, the family element or the family focus of the dairy farm, and also in the sheep farm, where perhaps, given the seasonality of lambing, that it might be very much an all hands on deck approach. So we have some data collected in recent years around the role of female farmers, and that's something that we want to interrogate a little bit more in the next while. So I suppose just to summarise around the social indicator development within the NFS. And through the work of Mary Brennan and her Walsh Scholarship, we have now begun to think about social sustainability in the NFS through farmer, animal and community dimensions. And so in terms of the farmer and the farm household, I suppose, we have data on the demographics, education, workload and isolation that we collect every year, and that is reported on in the sustainability report. We have the information from the health and safety survey that happens every number of years. And also in recent years, we've added questions around connectivity, generational renewal, farm succession, stress, and we are trying to develop and I suppose collate a lot of those issues into a well-being or quality of life index. In terms of the animal, I guess some of this is work in progress. We do have data on farm facilities and some elements of health and welfare, but something around antibiotic use is something that isn't currently collected. But we would hope that perhaps we could line up with data that will be available through, say, the Department of Agriculture, perhaps look at registers there that would help, I suppose, add to that dimension within the NFS. And I suppose that is an important point to make also. As farmers are asked to contribute more and more data, it's important that we collate and use existing data sources where we have them, so we can then add additional questions and perhaps issues around contemporary issues of interest, which I think, you know, the pandemic and the switch to remote working, for example, may be interesting in terms of farm succession into the future. So finally, around community, we have asked questions around rural viability and access to services. And I suppose we have seen in 2021 a deterioration in access to banking services, in particular, looking at the data. Our small farm survey is something that happens every number of years, and our data recorders are currently in field and recruiting small farms to take part in that. And are already talking about some of the interesting dimensions around succession and the change to remote working and what that might mean for the continuation and viability of those farms. And Cathal has already mentioned the biodiversity, and I suppose it's important to say that, you know, any of these metrics we would like to develop across the small farms and also the wider NFS survey in time. So thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Emma. And I'm going to ask my colleagues who are still here with us, Cathal, Trevor, and Teagasc's director, Famara, to turn back on their cameras, and we just take some questions that the audience have been sending in, and might prompt more questions. Cathal, one for you to start with, and it's kind of it's an important issue that's certainly come up in the context of the discussions around the food vision dairy and beef and sheep groups, is about carbon sequestration potential and its quantification at farm level. I mean, is it possible, or do we have the technology and the science done to do these kind of metrics on the sequestration side, you know, this carbon above and below the ground kind of idea?
No, it's an important point, but really, like, we're waiting. We're not at a degree of granularity where we can't give a broad figure for all farms being the same, as we know one size fits all. So we're kind of waiting on the science from the likes of Johnstown, Gary Castle, it's like Gary Lanigan and his Eddie Covariance towers he has in different places to tell us what sequestration potential is of different soil types. And when that science, I suppose, becomes peer reviewed and published, we'll be in a strong position to include it in the National Farm Survey. We'll also look at, you know, when these habitats maps are put out, we can also look at including things like hedgerows as well on our NFS farms, and I think signpost farms have measured some of these things on their farms, so that would probably be a starting point from which to build on going forward.
Yes, I think I just, the only thing I'd add to that is again, this kind of instrument of the sustainability report is really all the time developing to reflect our scientific knowledge base, and I guess the understanding of the soil carbon up and down is something that an awful lot of work is going on in Teagasc and elsewhere. And as soon as we have those revised understanding of what's happening and a good basis on which to add that metric in, we will certainly do it. But I'm not sure we're quite there yet to be able to do it with the data we have. Question on liming, Cathal, and again, this is back to you for the moment. A questioner asks, finds the data interesting in terms of the short-run impact, positive impact on emissions from the CO2 that comes from the lime, and asks, would it be less necessary, that's the liming, if fertilizer use was to go down? And I guess it's, you might explain the role that liming plays in as a supporting action to reducing fertilizer use.
Sure. Liming essentially, for grass and optimum crop growth, you want the pH of the soil to be at about 6.2, 6.3. And as you apply fertilizer and take off product like milk and meat, these products tend to be alkaline, and the soil tends to become more acidic. So it reduces the pH. So if you don't lime the soil, I suppose, to correct those offtakes, you're going to get suboptimal growth, or you won't get response from your fertilizer. It won't be able to utilize the fertilizer in an efficient way, both phosphorus, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and so on. So, okay, you know, in a real world, if you stop fertilizing, you wouldn't need as much lime. But you also, if your soil is not the correct pH as it is, 6.3 or 6.2, depending on crops or grassland, then you also need to get there in the first instance to apply lime. So I suppose the answer is yes, but also, you know, you need, if it's not optimal as it is, you need to correct it to get at your potential.
Okay, so it's, you know, it's about, insofar as possible, it's a supporting action to maintaining output while reducing the chemical end that you're applying to that.
Correct. And if you can get if you're not at suboptimal pH, and if you can get there, it releases something like 80 kilograms of chemical N of N naturally, which is 80 kilograms of less chemical N you'll have to apply.
Exactly. So it's good for the environment and potentially good for the farmer's pocket and bottom line as well. Final one for you for a few minutes, Cathal, is from our colleague Karen Daly, who thinks you did a great piece of work there and great presentation, but was asked for comment on the sort of the degree to which the story that we're telling in this report aligns with that was in the recent EPA report on water quality that came out at the end of last week. So would you care to comment on that, without this being necessarily the alpha and omega of Teagasc's position?
Yeah, no, look, as I said, I'm slow to draw inferences from average levels of nitrogen and phosphorus here to the wider, I suppose, geospatial environment locally, because as we saw, you know, I got my time in the Ag Catchments program, and the local biophysical environment drives so much in terms of, you know, one place could hold a huge capacity to you know, for a high end balance and not pollute, whereas others can be very much the opposite. Karen asked about the, you know, I didn't present any trends on phosphorus balances, and they are there in the report, like for table 10.1014 is from memory. I suppose I'm a bit slow to focus on phosphorus, because really you need to apply results in conjunction with a soil test, because phosphorus can be stored or mined in the soil. And that soil survey report I mentioned from David Wall and Mark Plunkett and Pat Murphy showed that about 55% of soils on dairy farms, soils taken, 20,000 samples taken in 2021, and 55% of the soils were suboptimal for phosphorus, to index 1 or index 2, which would indicate they need to increase the phosphorus application, and only about 22% were at the other, you know, that were enriched in phosphorus. So there was a spike in about 2018 on the back of poor weather, and more fertilizer went out than should have. But since then, the balances have been fairly stable at 13 kilograms per hectare on dairy farms. So I guess we really need to link our results to a soil test, which we've planned to do. And we're starting to do this through the Signpost program also. So again, it's a work in progress to develop the indicators, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and just to mention on the Signpost program, this is a kind of a key Teagasc activity at the moment in terms of how the organization addresses the kind of environmental challenges that are faced by the sector. And all of the farms participating in the Signpost program are having the NFS data collected from them, so that, you know, going forward we'll be able to, and later on this week some of that data will be presented. We will have the representative population data from the NFS, and we'll also be able to show how the Signpost farm programs compare, you know, in terms of their environmental indicators, as well as their core economic and social sustainability indicators going forward, to be able to illustrate, Signpost, how farmers out there in the real world, which are in the Signpost farm program, are getting on with the kind of action set out in the MACs. Emma, question for you, just to give Cathal a break. A question about some of the sheep results, I suspect, in terms of their engagement with ICT technologies and their social isolation, perhaps. And the questioner is wondering whether some of those results may be related to the age profile of sheep farmers.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think maybe I made that point that sheep farmers on average in the 2021 survey were 61. Cattle other farmers also on average that age. Tillage farmers age 60, cattle rearing 58, with the dairy, I suppose, a bit lower at 54. So potentially, yes.
Well, I know there was another question that I answered, typed in an answer, but it might be of interest to everybody, is the question about the social isolation results that you presented. And the questioner was wondering whether or not we had a comparator statistic from the general population, and to what degree are these older farmers more or less socially isolated than their non-farming Then the non-farming population, or are their peers in the non-farming population?
Yes, good question. And I looked for the comparator figure for the Teagasc and the smartphone, but not for that one in particular. But I thought when I was answering the question myself there that the behavioural unit in the ESRI might have some data on that. So I'll certainly look into it. Obviously, it was a very strange time and a particularly, I suppose, unique period in asking those questions from 18 to 21, but certainly it would be good to look at that again to see has that come back. But yeah, interesting to think about it, and probably farmers weren't overly different or aren't overly different, and I was thinking about that in looking at it. I suppose with an increasing number of people working from home, maybe we're just not seeing as many people outside of our household anyway in the general population.
Indeed. Trevor, one of the big policy kind of changes, I guess, or developments is this increased emphasis within policy on organic farming. Can you might just spend a minute or two telling the seminar participants about how the data collection activities we're engaged in are going to basically be trying to capture that in next year's and future years' sustainability reports?
Sure. I guess just to explain to people briefly first, why we don't have currently or we don't currently have the capacity to report on organic farms, and that is because they are such a small percentage of our farm population still, that when we get our sample of farms from the CSO, we just don't happen to have enough organic farms within that sample to be able to ordinarily talk about those organic farms. We do have a few organic farms, but not enough to be able to say something that we could stand over from a statistical point of view. So one of the actions we've taken to try to address that, given the prominence now that organic farms has in terms of national policy and at the policy level in the EU, is we went back to the CSO and specifically requested that we could survey a larger share of organic farms. So that's something that we've started in train in the last few months. And by the time we roll around to this time next year, we should have at least 1 year's worth of data on those organic farms. And that data would be analogous to the type of data that Cathal has been going through here today in terms of covering the suite of metrics that we produce for NFS farms in general.
And Emma, just kind of following on from that, another, just if you wouldn't mind, just saying a little bit about the small farm survey that we have run in the past and that we're running again this year as well, in terms of the farms that we don't cover in the core NFS that we're trying to collect information on in that survey that's out in the field as well.
Okay, so some time ago, the sample of the NFS farms the threshold was put at 8,000 standard output. So we don't collect data on an annual basis on those very small farms under that threshold. But in 2015, we did a survey of those small farms and collected all of the NFS data and looked at their economic, environmental and social sustainability. And the idea is to do that every number of years. So that's currently ongoing. And I think that last time round, we asked some questions around people's intentions and plans for those farms. And I think they will also be utilised this time around land use change, around succession, and where farmers see, maybe carbon farming and the potential for doing things maybe differently. We were going to try and interrogate that a little bit more. We're also going to look at the resilience of those farms to something like a policy shock, a policy change, and also think about their biodiversity footprint. That's the plan on those farms. So I think that should be very interesting. And again, the kind of social element around potential successors working from home might be of interest. And I think aligned to that, we asked some questions in the 2018 additional survey around succession. And we see that about 25% of dairy farms, for example, aged over 65 don't have a successor in mind, and the figure was even higher on the other systems, about a third. So I think that there are maybe questions to interrogate a little bit more there around generation renewal that might be of interest too on those smaller farms.
Okay, so we're kind of coming up towards our half-hour cut-off point, but there was a question, and it may be difficult to answer, and we may need to come back and put it in a Q&A or something that'll be available. And it was about the, this idea that it's related to your material, Emma, where you're asking the recorders are asking the farmers about their engagement with ICT, and there may be a younger person in the household who does the online stuff, and the degree to which we do or don't capture that within the NFS in terms of the responses. Would you be able to comment on that?
In terms of the online element, as opposed to any, okay, so we do have family labour components, and we have hours worked by all family members on the farm. But specifically on the online stuff, in the 2019 additional survey, we did ask the question around whether or not farmers used the internet or computer software in any way for their farm business, and also if they didn't, if they had a household member to do that. So we have some data on that. We saw that dairy farmers in particular were embracing that kind of technology, but we do have information on whether or not the farmer or a household member does so.
Great. Final question before we finish, and it's from our old colleague Thea Hennessy, who congratulates us on a good presentation, and asks if there are good examples internationally of where these sort of disparate indicators of sustainability are kind of melded together to come up with some composite indicator. I know this has been something we've talked about in the past. Would any of the three presenters like to talk about how that might or might not be possible? Anyone? There's that.
I guess it depends, Kevin, in the end on what kind of weighting you decide to afford to some of these metrics, and it's not something I've given a huge amount of consideration of, to be honest, but I have seen some stuff in the past where people talked about for example, convening expert groups and what have you to try to agree what an appropriate weighting might be to afford to each of these metrics in arriving at a composite. Some people were opposed, I think, to this idea of composite metrics as well, because philosophically they argued that this just suggested there was some kind of substitutability between these objectives that they had, issues with, I suppose, accepting. So I guess it sounds attractive as a proposition, but whether we could get consensus and agreement on how to do it, and I guess whether it gives us a better sense of what to do from a policy perspective is another matter. But as I say, some people I think had kind of concerns about doing that in terms of what it meant ultimately in terms of trading off one objective versus another.
Super. Thanks a million, Trevor. Listen, can I thank all of my colleagues for the hard work that's gone in behind the report, and that's not only the colleagues presenting, but all of the farm recorders and the voluntary farmer participants in the NFS for answering our questions, and encourage everybody who's spent the last hour and a half with us to download the report and to read it, and if they have any questions, to come back to us here at Teagasc, and we'll be more than happy to engage with you on that. Well, with that, listen, I'd like to thank everybody, and I hope you have a productive remaining part of your workday. Okay, bye now.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.